All right, what's going on, boyos? I've got a fun video for you today, but before we get into that, little channel update, if you want to call it that. I'm sure if you've been watching my videos for the past couple of months, you've seen me struggling with, I don't know if it's the motivation or the creativity aspect of making the videos where it's just tough for me to commit to what I want to do. I've considered like having Kirsten just pick the video and then I figure out how to make that in the best way possible. Still kind of exploring that because I think that could be a different avenue to approach these. It's just like, hey, Kirsten, would you go skim the comments on my YouTube channel, see what people kind of want to see, pick something for me. My job is to do it as well as possible, right? Just like kind of back in college, you get an assignment. You don't get to pick the assignment. Your job is to do a good job with it. So we could do that. But I think I've kind of come to a helpful realization, right? And I hope this doesn't come off as arrogant because that's not my point at all. Just kind of hopefully a helpful conceptualization for how I'm going to pick what videos to make, how I approach these videos. I'm going to approach this as if I coach you guys. Obviously, tons of you are plenty good at lifting. You're not coached by me. You wouldn't want to be coached by me. That's A-okay. You might have another coach, but I think that's the lens through which I'm going to make a lot of these videos is you're all my clients. You're all my friends. I'm going to tell you guys things that I think you should be doing to get better at your own lifting, right? I hope that doesn't come off as bitchy. It's not what I want it to be, but I thought that could be a fun lens to make me enjoy making the videos more because I love interacting with the guys I coach. I love when they ask me questions. I love using like different problems we run into in training as teaching moments. And so like I never shut the fuck up when I'm messaging my guys about like I'll babble about, oh, the reason you might want to do this over this and blah, blah, blah. And I can never seem to shut up. So that'd be a good thing for the YouTube channel. So that's kind of the lens that I'm going to go with. And so today we're going to talk about 5, maybe 6 things I would like to see in your approach to increasing your deadlifts, right? The problem is Bromley has been on a rampage making content recently, and it's damn good for daily content. And he made a video of like things you should probably be working harder on in your training to increase your deadlift, right? And that motherfucker took all of the good ones. Lo and behold, the guy who's very smart and makes great videos mentioned the things you should probably be doing in his things you should be doing video. So a little bit of repetition from what Bromley talked about, but I figure if I went out of my way to be original, I'd probably be deviating from what I think the best answer is. So the first one, entry 0.5 for things I would like to see in your deadlift program. And we're calling it 0.5 because it's almost a separate aspect of training that fills a role on accident. And that's that I would like to see you improving your squatting. Right? If this is a separate objective, let's just say you're a power lifter or you're a weightlifter and developing your squat is something you're doing for other reasons, awesome. We have that box pre-checked without having to do it dedicated for the deadlift. I don't necessarily think that if you're trying to increase your strength on your back squat, that you need to then pick a squat variation that's more pointed towards the deadlift. Just the general leg power you're going to get from squats to depth, whether they're high bar, low bar, or front squats, is going to kind of build the physical characteristics we are looking for. Yeah, maybe you can make an argument that an SSB or a front squat would be a little bit better, or maybe we're going to do a deadlift stance box squat because that mirrors our positions a little bit more, and all of those can work. But I tend to think that if we are training our squat as a separate objective, we're kind of checking that general leg power box. Now, if you don't train squats and you're just someone who's like, oh no, man, I don't give a shit about my squat, I want to develop my deadlift. Well, I would recommend you add in something. If the reason you're not squatting is some past injury, we can get a little further away. I think single leg presses, deadlift stance leg presses with a pause, box squats from your deadlift stance, especially with an SSB, can fill that role. Even if you can't do a regular traditional squat, we still want to have some dedicated leg power development. Eddie Hall always cited his super heavy leg pressing as a central part of getting his 500 kilogram deadlift for that general leg and glute power. That being said, most of us are squatting, so we don't necessarily need to pick something to fill this role. It's kind of auto-filled. But if it's not filled, add that in there. Now, number 1 thing I like to see in a deadlift program. I personally like to see some kind of direct abdominal training in someone's deadlift program. While bracing is a skill, and that skill is probably the most important thing, I do find that having some direct training for the abs, developing a better mind-muscle connection by hypertrophying our abs, usually allows people to master their bracing mechanics to a greater degree. I think that hitting front planks, hitting ab rollout, hitting hanging leg raises, hitting dead bugs, GHD sit-ups, Lots and lots of exercises, probably some I'm missing, but kind of those are the first couple that I love throwing out there. Maybe some holds at the bottom of a GHD sit-up is a great kind of plank variation where we can start adding some load. I like to see some direct abdominal training. I usually find that when that's present in the program, people feel better about their brace mechanic, and when people are doing a better job bracing, they lift more weight. So that would be the first thing I like to see is anytime we're doing some squatting or deadlifting, minimum. Maybe it's every time we train, and maybe it's even every day, even on the days we don't train. I like to see some sort of abdominal work, kind of rotating between those motions we talked about, and I think that it helps people out. I also like to not neglect the obliques. I think that developing your obliques also can have a bit of a feel component towards your brace. Lots of people will say as you get better at bracing, it's not just a belly breath. It's trying to expand in 360 degrees. We're trying to breathe not just forward into our belt, but laterally into our belt and back into our back. And this is something that I've been working on within my own training, and it's yielded huge results. It's something we all know. We're all told by everybody that knows what they're doing that your brace quality matters, and improving your brace is something that you should be working towards. I absolutely agree with this, but that's almost a vague concept. If you don't really get the bracing mechanics, doing some of these bracing drills, it still is just foreign. And one thing that I found helped was spamming lots of these abdominal exercises, especially the front planks, but also spamming suitcase carries and side planks, so isometric oblique exercises. I started to get a better feel for what it might mean to like contract my oblique and then breathe into that area and breathe backwards into my lower back. And it wasn't until I started doing some of these isometric ab exercises that things started to click when I was also putting my due diligence in and focusing on my breathing and bracing during all of my warm-ups and using them as chances to practice. So I would love to see some oblique and abdominal work from that list I kind of put together. You could do flexion-based or rotation-based oblique work as well. I think that's just a good habit for keeping good general human function and being strong in a lot of ways, is doing some sideways med ball throws, doing some Pavlov presses and training some anti-rotation, doing just some side bends and training that lateral flexion. All of these are awesome. I just like spamming tons and tons of suitcase carries and side planks, and those have kind of given me the best results. I used to do a lot of windmills also because they're a great exercise for shoulder stability as well as for obliques, but those have given my immobile self some issues recently. So less windmills as of recent. So that's the first thing I like to see. The second thing I like to see is I definitely think some extreme effort should be put into some vertical pulling. Right? There's a very low likelihood that you're going to see direct carryover from improving your vertical pulling prowess to your deadlift because there's so many components of a deadlift that are completely absent from the vertical pull. The vertical pull is mostly just training kind of your lats, that ability to keep the weight in tight and lock in that mid-back position, which is a very important part of the deadlift, but there's so many things downstream that you might not see direct carryover, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? We're not working our spinal erectors in any meaningful capacity. That's huge. We're not working our glutes and hamstrings, right? We're not working our ability to brace. We're not working our ability to drive off the ground. There's so many things that we're missing from this, but I still think it warrants doing it. I think putting in difficult work and seeing your progress on your performance metrics for volume sets of vertical pulling, just hypertrophying the lat is a good long-term investment to make into your training, and it lets you keep that weight locked in a little closer to you. So we're kind of working down the chain. The next thing that I like to see is some sort of horizontal pulling. Again, the biggest thing we're working here is that ability to keep the weight in close, which can't be understated, but we might not see direct carryover. But that also depends on what horizontal pulling motion we select. So to rewind a little bit, vertical pulling kind of got two main options. You can either do pull-ups from a variety of grips, or you can do pull downs from a variety of grips. Both should work. I think that you should probably do both on a weekly basis. Maybe one day is pull downs, one day is pull-ups. And we just want to make sure we're doing enough of these to gradually see progress within our training. If we fast forward 5-6 months down the line and you're still doing the same weight on your lat pull downs, we're probably not deriving the benefits of the lat pull downs. To see the benefit of the accessory, we usually need to see some forward movement. Now, as far as the horizontal pulling, this is where it varies a little bit. Some people will use up so much lower back fatigue on their deadlifting that it's not really viable to do a non-chest supported version here. But lots of people are just being a little bit soft. It's hard to do a non-chest supported version, but that doesn't mean that it's not productive. Bromley's often referred to like, hey, the loading here is pretty minimal. This could almost be considered GPP work for your lower back. And that is almost a benefit in itself. Like we talked about how the overlap in musculature between our vertical pull and our deadlift is kind of poor. The overlap in musculature between our row and our deadlift is quite good. And that might in itself be a real selling point behind the exercise. So usually what I like to see, I like going a little heavy duty with things. Not that there's any good evidence to suggest the old, well, pull-up's always going to be better than a pull-down. Based on what? What is the basis for that? Because it's a closed chain movement? What it makes that better? Act like, can you give me like details? And it's kind of hard to put details into that. It's something that we've been taught, but I don't necessarily think it's got this basis in reality. But that being said, I'm trying to get heavy duty strong, so I'm picking the heavy duty option. So I'll usually favor the pull-up. I'll usually favor the barbell or the dumbbell row. But we can get in that horizontal pulling volume via chest-supported dumbbell rows, like any machine in that horizontal plane. These are all going to get the job done. Low rows, cable rows will get the job done. I generally favor towards the heavier duty option. So if the person I feel would benefit from that extra lower back loading, that extra bracing practice, which I think is a huge benefit, is, hey, my lower back is fried. I've got to do these barbell rows. You got to get your shit together and brace or it's going to be miserable. So it almost forces a learning curve, or at least that's how it worked for me. But if I feel they would benefit, I might see a barbell row, whether that's a strict pendlay row, whether that's a traditional bent row, or whether that's a more upright Yates row. We're going to bias towards the upper back a little bit more. I'll kind of rotate between those three depending on what the athlete is struggling with. And if I don't feel like that axial loading is going to be beneficial, oftentimes I will look to do a supported single arm dumbbell row. So very similar motion. We can apply similar concepts. So we could be kneeling on a bench and parallel with the floor, much like if we were doing a strict pendlay row, or we can post up high with our hand and be at kind of a 45-degree torso angle as if we were doing more of a Yates style row. So we can bias these kind of around as we see fit. And so usually what I would pick is try to go heavy, use free weights, not because they're inherently better, but because that is usually my recommendation, because I think it works on your proprioceptive abilities of bracing, whether you're doing the barbell or the dumbbell. I think that the being aware of your trunk and focusing on maintaining a brace through a long output of force can have benefits. And so I favor those. That being said, we have all these other options of cables and we have these other options of machines or chest-supported dumbbells, but those are my biases. And so if the person can't handle that lower back work or wouldn't benefit from the bent over rows, and I want them to just exhaust their pulling musculature and not kind of that supporting trunk musculature, I'll pick a supported kind of dumbbell row. And that's how we're going to spare it. And one cool little benefit of the single arm dumbbell rows is you get some little bit rotational work / anti-rotational work in there, which is only going to make your midsection stronger. But those are my kind of two general picks. Lots of things could fill that role. Now, the third thing that I like to see present in the program is going to be hamstring curls. Again, because there's so many components of the deadlift that aren't used, right, in a hamstring curl, meaning goddamn the whole upper half, we're not likely to see direct carryover unless we are in a really weird spot where our hamstrings are so far behind. But that being said, they aren't axially fatiguing, and they're a great investment for the future. A bigger muscle has the potential to be a stronger muscle, all things equal. So if we can do it when we're smoked. It's lying down or seated. If we can go put in, I would say between 2 and 4 hard sets of hamstring curls 2 times a week, we can kind of always be ahead of where we would be at with only specific training in terms of hamstring development. And that usually results in better long-term development of the deadlift. If the hamstrings are kind of a little out ahead of you, always, because you can always fill up this volume at the end. You just have to be willing to work hard. So I would love to see a hamstring curl present once to twice per week. If I had to pick between the two, I would usually favor the seated hamstring curl, so we're training at a greater average muscle length. But that being said, if we're doing them twice a week, I would love to train at a variety of lengths and have one day of like maybe the standing curl or a lying curl, and then one day a seated curl. So variety if we have the option. If we're picking one or the other, the seated is ideal, but any kind of knee flexion volume should get the job done here. If you've got a Nordic machine, or especially an assisted Nordic machine where we can run up good clean volume with standardized form, that might be even better because you can really push the tonnage on those, or glute ham raises. I'm not a big fan because they're difficult to standardize, and what's hard to standardize is hard to numerically overload. But that being said, they get the job done if you're in a home gym setting. and you don't have a glute ham raise, you could just do volume on banded hamstring curls. That'll get the job done. And then the last thing I like to see is I like to see a little bit of extra hip hinging volume where we're kind of focusing on the glutes, whether that be a 45-degree back extension with a brief pause at the top. You could hold a dumbbell, you could hold a barbell, you could hold plates in a stack. Whether that's off a GHD, which is my personal bias. I would say the 45-degree version is going to bias towards the hamstrings and that mid-range strength a little bit. So if that's where you struggle, maybe the 45 would be slightly better. Whereas I think that the back extensions off the GHD is going to bias more towards flexing glutes through at the top. So maybe if you're struggling a little higher in the lift, the GHD version would be a good option for you. We're getting in some easy to recover from lower back volume. Depending on what we're doing, we're getting in a little bit of upper back volume that's easy to recover from. That's very specific. We're getting in really good glute and hamstring training because once we finish deadlifting, and this is a concept I've talked about a lot of times, I sound like a broken record, but once we finish kind of doing as much deadlifting as we can productively handle, what is fried? Why can't we do more deadlifting? And it's usually going to be the spinal erectors, especially the lower back. What could handle more volume that are important to a deadlift? Well, we have our lats and upper back, which, as we talked about earlier, we want to fill in that volume with vertical and horizontal pulling. But also our glutes and hamstrings are very relevant to a deadlift and could probably handle more as well. It's just the spinal erectors that we've kind of topped out. So I would like to fill up the hamstrings with some knee flexion, kind of the hamstrings and the glutes with some easy to recover extra hip hinging volume. We could probably do a hip thrust here. I usually bias towards the back extensions because you can never hit too much hamstrings to develop your deadlift, but the hip thrust can be a great option. Some people find that that makes their low back feel really good when they're gradually progressing at hip thrusts within their program. So more power to you. I think that's a reasonable pick. It is a hip hinge at the end of the day. I like the back extensions. Those are kind of my go-tos. Maybe you could take this a little bit more heavy duty and do some good mornings. Maybe an RDL we would kind of classify as like the heavy duty version of this slot, this exercise slot. Dumbbell RDLs, trap bar RDLs. These could probably fit into this same general category. I just like to hammer up some volume on the easy to recover options. And all of this is predicated by the fact that you're doing enough deadlifting to where you probably would move forward at least a little bit from the deadlifting itself. We're doing this to bolster our result, not to create a result, because I think that people will go too far where they're like, what accessories do I need to do to deadlift more? Well, you need a deadlift. That's the first and foremost thing. If we're going to do one thing, it's going to be the deadlift. It's not going to be the accessories. This isn't the old West Side increase your deadlift without deadlifting programs, because if you see, that worked okay. Lots of guys got into kind of the mid 800s with dubious lockouts in a deadlift suit. And then as soon as people rotated to a more specific approach to deadlifting and realized, hey, maybe I don't have to pull heavy once a month and I can get good at the skill that I'm actually trying to do, the deadlift standards shot up quite a bit and people are pulling more drug tested on stiff bars than they were back then, right? And I think that's largely due to improvements in training specificity. That being said, obviously the gene pool got bigger too. I'm rambling here. But yeah, those would be my main things I would like to see in the program. I got to bias towards the back extensions to fill that final role. How much of each one you do can be varied based on how much time you have to train, as well as what your perceived weaknesses are. If you're kind of in the spot where you're like, well, my low back is monstrous, my glutes and hamstrings are monstrous, and I've got a weak, small upper back, then you're going to be doing a lot of the vertical and horizontal pulling. We're going to be making that the lion's share of our training, and then we're just going to do a bit of the one like the other two. So maybe I would do 3 sets of vertical and 3 sets of horizontal pulling twice a week, and maybe I would do the hamstring curls on one day and the back extensions on another day. So dialing back what we already have as a strength and putting that extra training economy into what we perceive to be our weaknesses. So thank you guys for watching my video. I appreciate you boys.